Welcome back to our lesson on life sciences, where we are looking at how leaves lose water in the process of transpiration. We've already looked at how the water moves out of the leaf, and we are now going to be looking at, well, what makes plants lose water quickly? In other words, factors affecting transpiration. And there are certain environmental factors which will make plants lose water more quickly or more slowly, and we're going to be having a look at each of those. The four we're going to be looking at are temperature. If it's hotter, do plants lose water more quickly? Light intensity. If it's brighter, do plants lose water more quickly? If it's windy, do they lose more water more quickly? Or if it's humid, if there's moisture in the air, will they lose water more quickly or more slowly? So we're going to have a look at each one of these to see how does this work. Okay, and we're starting off with temperature. Now, as we know, when things get hot, molecules start moving very, very quickly. So transpiration would occur more quickly. So because it's hot, the rate of evaporation is faster. The molecules move faster. They move out of the stomata faster. Another point is that the water holding capacity of warm air is greater than that of cold air, so more water can evaporate into the air. Now, if we use a potometer and actually measure how much water is lost at different temperatures, and we plot it on a graph, we end up with something like this. And this is what we're going to have a look at now. Why does this graph look like it does? Okay, so first of all, as the temperature increases, the rate of transpiration increases, and that's here. Okay, there's your temperature getting greater, and what's happening to your rate of transpiration? It is increasing. Oops. But after a while, that increase stops. Why? And the reason for that is, as it gets very hot and the plant loses too much water, the stomata start closing. So even if the air is hot, because the stomata are closed, more transpiration can't occur, so your transpiration rate then stabilizes or remains more or less constant. Next factor we're looking at is light intensity. In other words, how bright the light is. Will more transpiration occur at midday than just at 7 o'clock in the morning when the light is actually not bright? Well, let's have a look at what the scientists have found out by doing experiments using a potometer and a plant placed at different light intensities. So what we have here is, as your light intensity increases, in other words, as the light gets brighter, again, increase of transpiration occurs drastically. Oh dear, but then look what happens here. It evens out. Okay, so at first, the rate of transpiration increases, and the reason is the stomata are opening wider. But as we get to this section here, these poor stomata are as wide as they can get. They can't open any wider, so the stomata can't open any wider, and therefore the same amount of water moves out all the time, so the transpiration level remains constant. Next one we're having a look at is humidity. If there's moisture in the atmosphere, how's that going to affect transpiration? Will it have any effect? Looking at the results of experiments using pedometers and putting them under the same plant, being put under different conditions of humidity, scientists end up with a graph that looks like this. And boy, is it very different to the other graphs we have seen. But why? Let's analyze the graph. Okay, so at the beginning, which is here, okay, that's when the air is very dry. So water vapor diffuses rapidly out. Okay, in other words, this is high transpiration here. And low humidity. So transpiration occurs very quickly. Does it keep like that? No, something different happens. Because after that little bit, transpiration drops. Why would it drop? Okay, because here the humidity is high. And because there's so much air or so much water in the air outside, air is more humid. Okay, so transpiration decreases. And would it ever stop? It can stop if the concentration of water in the atmosphere is as high as the concentration of water inside the leaf. And that would be very, very rarely because the air inside the leaf is saturated with water. So it generally just slows down, but it doesn't completely stop. So it stops almost completely. Why? Okay, and this diagram illustrates why and how this occurs. This is a section at the top of a leaf. Okay, let's get pen here. Oh, come on. Okay, so that's your epidermis. Here's your epidermis. There's your stoma. And here's the palisade mesophyll. And here is an air space. And the little yellow things are the water molecules. If it's very humid, this is the air outside. And if we have a look, there's a fairly high concentration of water molecules in the air. There's also a fairly high concentration of water molecules inside the leaf. And if the concentration is the same, is there going to be diffusion? No, diffusion will stop. But as I said, generally there's a little bit of a higher concentration here inside the leaf, so a few of those molecules will actually move out, but not many of them. Now, an important term coming across here is something called a concentration gradient. And that is the difference between the concentration of water here in the air and the concentration of water here inside the leaf. And if there is no concentration gradient, because the concentration is the same, there isn't going to be any diffusion of water vapor out of the leaf. If there's no water outside the leaf, there's going to be a high concentration gradient, so transpiration would occur much, much faster. Next one we're having a look at is wind. And again, this has a slightly different shape to some of the other graphs we've looked at. The scientists have done an experiment where you put pedometers with the plant under different wind speed conditions and then measure how much or how fast transpiration occurs and plot it on a graph, and then you end up with a graph looking like this. So let's have a look. We're now looking at wind, and we're starting off with no wind. Okay, and that's right here. When the wind velocity is low, in other words, there's no wind or there's very little wind, what's your transpiration like? It's low, because the water vapor moving out of the leaf remains near the leaf, which decreases the concentration difference or gradient. And because there's a low concentration gradient, transpiration occurs slowly. Now let's have a look at what happens when the wind velocity gets higher. So that was, we looked at low, it's now high, and what's happening to this curve? Wow, it's going up and up and up. And the reason is the wind removes the water vapor from the leaf surface, replaces it with dry air, so that means your concentration difference remains high, so your transpiration would occur more and more quickly. And that is why the more wind there is, the higher the transpiration rate is. And this little cartoon shows basically what happens here in still air. This shows the layer of water that's kind of sticking around after transpiration, and here it's actually quite thick because there's nothing blowing the air away. If we look at this one, there's much less water sticking around the leaf because a lot of it is being blown away. And the faster the wind is blowing, the more of this layer will disappear. Well, I think your brains are probably bursting now, so maybe it's time for a break.